Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. On February 6th, a constitutional amendment was introduced in the California legislature by Member Isaac Bryan. Bryan's amendment would give voting rights to people in prison on felony convictions. 2 days later, David Cruz, an ex-felon who spent 13 years in state prison and then helped organize a nonprofit called Initiate Justice, held a press conference to support the prison vote amendment. Cruz said, quote, "Despite what many people assume, people in prison care about the same political issues that we outside do. Is the issue of the right of prisoners to vote important, or is it just trivial? First off, the amendment is not a shoo-in. To become a law, it will have to get a 2/3 vote in both California's Senate and California's Assembly, and that will be rough. But if passed, will the amendment automatically do what the Initiate Justice group wants? Will it, quote, advance progressive policies, close quote, in California? Progressives point out that blacks are only 6% of California's population, but they are a full 20% of California's prisoners. And if any of these people were falsely accused, the way that Tyree Nichols was a month ago, some of these prisoners may be jailed for simply being black. Hence, the argument goes, this is a voter suppression issue. Explains the leader of America's progressive movement, Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, "If we are serious about calling ourselves a democracy, we must firmly establish that the right to vote is an inalienable and universal principle that applies to all American citizens 18 years and older, period, whether you're in jail or not." As you'd expect, Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the United States Senate, disagrees. He says voting is a privilege properly exercised at the voting booth, not from a prison cell. We are talking about rapists, murderers, robbers, and even terrorists or spies. Do we want to see convicted terrorists who seek to destroy this country voting in elections? Do we want to see jailhouse blocks banding together to oust sheriffs and government officials who are tough on crime? What both Sanders and McConnell ignore is that there are groups in prison far better organized than the Republican or Democratic parties, and that those groups could easily dictate who a prisoner votes for. First, the black prison population has been subject since the 1950s to recruitment by the Nation of Islam, a virulently anti-Semitic organization whose head calls Jews termites and Satanists. Today, 18% of America's 2 million prisoners are black Muslims. That's roughly 360,000 prisoners nationwide, a big hunk of potential votes. Then there are prison gangs. The Latin population of prisons is controlled by the Mexican mafia, who maintain obedience by killing those who stray from their orders. And the white population is ruled by groups like the anti-Semitic Aryan Brotherhood and the Nazi lowriders, who enforce their power with torture and murder. What's worse, these groups also control networks of gangs outside the prison system. Their revenue stream comes from the sale of drugs on the streets and inside prison walls. If given the chance, do you think the Nation of Islam, the Mexican Mafia, and the Aryan Brotherhood would tell prisoners who to vote for? I suspect they would. I agree that to maintain a democracy, the right to vote should be absolute, and that the forms of voter suppression first invented 148 years ago to suppress the votes of newly liberated slaves should be abolished. But in this debate, it's important to take into account the mechanisms of severe voter enforcement that may be possible far beyond the bounds of progressives and conservatives in our prisons. This is Howard Bloom speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how.